Okay, here we're going to review the circulatory system. So let's go. So physiology, remember the function of an organ or an organ system or a cell even. The physiology means the function, so how it works. So the function of the circulatory system is that it transports nutrients and oxygen. Oxygen is a gas. Nutrients are not gases, right? So that's the difference. So oxygen is a gas. So this is part of gas exchange or gas transport. Nutrients are usually things that are dissolved in the plasma of the blood. So they're dissolved in the water. These are things usually from food that we eat. Right, gas comes from breathing, oxygen comes from breathing, nutrients come from stuff that we eat. It also carries waste. Now, those waste can be either gas or they can be dissolved waste. Again, so there are different kinds of waste. Gas waste is CO2, right? So that's part of gas exchange. So anytime you see something about gas exchange, we're talking about oxygen and carbon dioxide. If you're talking about waste transfer or nutrient pickup, we're talking about things like amino acids to build protein, sugar to build carbohydrates. Those are nutrients, fatty acids to build our fats. And waste would be things like urea or nitrogenous waste, things that contain nitrogen, which we get from breaking down proteins. Things of that nature. Of course, we also talked about there are toxins. Toxins are things that are not produced actually by your cells, but rather like you ingest them and they're bad for you. So think alcohol, think all the chemicals in smoke, think like cyanide. So all of those things would be toxins. Versus waste, which are produced by your cells, but stuff that you don't need. And so the kidneys are going to filter out the wastes. And the liver is going to filter out the toxins, and it's going to do that when the blood gets sent there by the circulatory system. So how does the circulatory system work? Well, it's made up of a number of parts. So these are now we're getting into the not physiology, but the anatomy, like what it's made of. So there are arteries, right? Arteries carry blood away from the heart, away, right? Arteries away, because they both start with A. That's how we remember. They carry blood away from the heart. And arteries, this is like a cross-section of an artery, so it's going to have a thick outer wall. They're going to be very thick compared to veins. They've got a lot of muscle because they actually pulse. So this is smooth muscle. It's not something you control. Obviously, it has an inner lining of endothelium, and that central hole, this is called the lumen. Now, lumen just means a space in the middle of like a tube. So there's a lumen in your arteries and veins. There's also a lumen in your digestive system. So it literally just means space. And that's where your blood is going to flow. The blood is flowing in a fluid called plasma. And it's a mixture of cells. You've got red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. Platelets are like broken up pieces of cells that help to let your blood clot. So when you get a cut, they stop bleeding. So those are platelets. So that's like a mixture of what makes up blood. Most of it is plasma. Plasma is mostly water, and it is what your blood cells are moving in. So remember, one of the unique things about blood, it's a connective tissue, but its extracellular matrix is a fluid. It's that plasma, and that's what's going to flow through the lumen. So arteries have thick walls. Again, that's because really for two reasons. They do kind of help to pulse blood in some ways, but they also just have to withstand a lot of pressure because arteries are taking blood away from the heart. They're going to be closer to the pushing of the heart. The heart is the pump, so the arteries are going to be closer to that pushing, so the blood is going to be under much more pressure. So they just have to be stronger to contain the blood. Which is what it says here. The pressure in the artery is relatively high because it's been pushed by the heart, and they flow away from the heart. And there is no exception to that rule. There are very few things in biology that there is no exception to, but all arteries flow away from the heart. Most arteries carry oxygenated blood. Most arteries have oxygenated blood because they are carrying away from the heart, and the heart is taking, oxygenated blood to the rest of the tissues. But you do have the pulmonary artery. And the pulmonary artery is moving away from the heart, but that's taking blood to the lungs from the heart. And so that's the one place where an artery is carrying blood away from the heart that has not yet gotten oxygen, right? Because the oxygen gets picked up in the lungs. So this is the one place in the body where an artery is carrying deoxygenated blood because it has not yet gone to the lungs. And then the blood will pick up the It'll pick up the oxygen in the lungs, and then it will come back to the heart, and then all the arteries after that will have oxygen in the blood. So that is why that one doesn't have oxygenated blood. So like we said, they have a lot of muscle tissue because they are going to contract. They do need to withstand the pressure. And so here's some of your big arteries, right? The biggest one is the aorta. That is our largest artery. It's where all of the blood exits the heart, and then it branches off into a bunch. The aorta continues, though. It's not like the aorta just branches off into 3 branches up here and then it goes away. The aorta continues down behind the heart, called the descending aorta. And then all of the major arteries in our lower body are going to break off of that, including the 2 big branches here, which are the iliac arteries, which branch at our pelvis. But that's not really super important, so we will move on from that. Then we have veins. Veins have a much thinner outer wall because their blood is at a much lower pressure, so they don't have to withstand a lot of force. They don't have a lot of muscle because they're not going to do any pulsing. They do have their endothelium lining, just like the arteries, but they have a bigger lumen. They have a much bigger space for the blood to flow through, and that's to make it easier for the blood to flow, because most of the veins are going to be coming from below the heart. So they're actually going to be carrying blood up against gravity, right? So if we think about like our heart is up here, but not really above our arms. This is not a good picture. Try again. So here's our guy. The heart's like right about here. Most of the body is below the heart, which means most of the blood having to go back to the heart has to go up. And that is against the flow of gravity. So we need veins to be sort of evolved to make it easier for that blood to flow up. And having that big central space allows for less resistance, allows that blood to flow up much more easily. The veins here are going to be drawing the blood back down to the heart, so it's a little bit less important for those. But there are more of them that are going to be going up. So veins have evolved to make that more simple, more easily accomplished. So veins do have thin walls. They don't have high pressure, and their muscle tissue is limited because they don't pulse. But they do have valves, and that is unique. Arteries don't have valves, but veins do. And again, that's because most of the veins are going to be coming up against the flow of gravity. So when the blood goes up with each heartbeat, when the heartbeat is like resting in that low pressure time during that diastolic pressure, the blood is going to want to come back down. And so there are these valves so that the blood can't come back down. It keeps our blood flowing in one direction. And the unidirectional flow of blood is very important because it has to flow in the whole circuit. If it starts going backwards and stuff, then we're not going to get the nutrients where they need to be. And we're not going to get the oxygen where it needs to be, and we're not going to carry waste away from our cells, both carbon dioxide and dissolved waste. And so we need that blood to continually flow in one direction. So that is a really big, important part of valves. Now, the valves, they don't have much muscle, so they don't control the valves directly, and it's mostly done by what's called the thoracic pump system and the skeletal pump system. So the thoracic pump system is essentially pressure from breathing and cardiac pressure, but the skeletal pump system actually is where the skeletal muscles aid in operating the valve. So when we move, and this is why it's really important that in order to be healthy, there are like all these health benefits of exercise and movement and being having an active lifestyle. And that's because it does affect even just your cardiovascular system. When the muscles contract, they squeeze open the top valve and the bottom one stays closed. And when they relax, then the bottom valve can close, or the top valve can close in addition to that bottom valve. So it sort of helps to pump the blood up using our muscle movement, using the movement of the muscles so that the blood progresses on to the next section of vein. So this is why it's really important to get up and get moving. Even after like major surgeries, they tell you like after like a major abdominal surgery, you should be up and moving the next day, which seems crazy, but it's like important to the function of your body. Here is another example of the skeletal pump, right? So it's just sort of helping to move the blood up through those veins using the motion of the muscles. Other animals rely on this more deeply. So like horses, actually, each of their hooves kind of act as a mini heart when they move and walk, because their hooves are so far from their heart, because they're such big animals. Their movement is like necessary to keep their blood flowing. It's not as necessary for us, but it does definitely have a lot of benefits. So here's the way that sort of arteries work, right? And veins, right? They work together. Arteries are going to be carrying blood away from the heart. So there's our blood flowing into the arteries. It's going to break off. Those arteries are going to branch into smaller and smaller veins, or smaller and smaller arteries called arterioles. Those will then branch even further into capillaries, which are those tiny single-celled thickness tubes that we talked about. This is where gas exchange is going to happen. Gas exchange is going to happen in the capillaries, as well as nutrient delivery and waste pickup. Right, that's going to happen in the capillaries, because that's where diffusion can occur, because they're only one cell thick. Once it's gone through the tissues that it needs to drop off the nutrients to, those capillaries come back together, so they start to aggregate. They create small veins called venules, and then those venules group together, and they become the big veins. The largest veins that we have are the vena cavas, which is basically 2 veins that carry all of the blood into our heart, right? Because veins go in to the heart. And so those are our 2 biggest ones. And so this is a good diagram to compare those. Then the heart. The heart is sort of the center of the circulatory system. It's the pump. It's what allows the blood to flow through this whole system. Without the heart, nothing else works, because this is like the engine. It's pumping everything. And so it has a few different pieces. In your dissection, you are going to see, if you have not already, the 2 atria, or the atrium, which they look in our baby pig just like little flaps of skin. The ventricles in this picture, they look like they're the same size. The atriums are actually much smaller than the ventricles, because the ventricles have very thick muscular walls. Because the ventricles they're the bottom chambers of the heart, and they're going to actually push the blood out of the heart. The right ventricle is going to push it to the lungs, and the left ventricle is going to push it to the rest of the body. So we'll sort of start the system with the vena cavas. The vena cavas are going to be returning blood into the heart. If it's coming from above the heart, it's going to come in through the superior vena cava. If it's coming in from below the heart, it's going to come in from the inferior vena cava, which will bring it right here into the right atrium. The atria are basically just holding places for the blood before they go to where they're going to be pumped. Notice there are these valves between each of the steps within the heart. That just keeps the blood flowing in one direction, keeps it flowing the way that it's supposed to go. So that's important, so that the blood can continually flow to where it needs to be. So we're going to fill up this right atrium. So blood fills up all in here. And then at the same time, the left atrium is actually going to fill up, because the 2 atria come together and then the 2 ventricles come together. So you get a 2-part beat, right? Where the atria contract, and then like a little bit later, the ventricles contract. That's why our heartbeat sounds like bum, bum. So then the blood flows into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, the muscular walls are going to push it out the pulmonary artery into the lungs. In the lungs, it's going to do pulmonary gas exchange. It's going to drop off its carbon dioxide. It's going to pick up oxygen. Then the blood is going to come back in through the pulmonary veins. Those veins are going to come into the left atria from both sides of the lungs, right? So it's going to come from each side of the lungs into the left atrium. Then the blood flows into the left ventricle. This ventricle has the thickest muscular walls. This is the biggest part of the heart, because this is the last place the blood is going to go before it's sent out to the rest of the body. So it's going to get a big squeeze here. All the blood is going to go into the aorta, and it's going to go to the rest of the body. Some goes out these branches, some goes down to a lot of it goes down to the rest of the body. And then it comes back. It'll branch off into capillaries. It'll do its exchange. It'll come back to the heart via the vena cavas. Some of this blood from the aorta will actually come into what are called the veins of the heart, and sort of nutrient-rich veins of the heart, which are going to bring blood into the muscle of the heart itself. The coronary arteries are what they're called. They're not actually veins, I'm sorry, because they're not going into the heart. They're going away from the heart. They're going to the heart muscle, but away from the heart like path. And they're going to feed the nutrients to the heart muscle. And again, those are the things that get blocked that then lead to heart attacks, because your heart muscle doesn't get the nutrients that it needs. So it's unidirectional. Means it only goes in one direction. It's coming in on the right side and out on the left. And remember, those left and rights are from the heart's perspective. So this is the right and this is the left.